morning, everyone, and good afternoon and good evening, depending on which time zone you're in. I'd like to welcome you to this GW Institute for Korean Studies and event. This is a North Korea Economic Forum panel discussion. The title of today's talk is The Pandemic's Impact on North Korea, Leadership Dynamics, Markets, and Public Health. And as you've been able to see from the invitation, we have an august panel of discussants or commentators today. And so without too much further ado, I'll dive right into the event. I want to offer a few logistical comments and also thank our co-sponsor for today, the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. So let me begin with introducing our first two speakers. I'll introduce the pairs of speakers right before each pair speaks. So first, speaking about the leadership dynamics in North Korea, we'll have Ken Goss, who is the director of the Adversary Analytics Program at the CNA Corporation. And he has long experience following the North Korean leadership and has written several books on this topic. It's my pleasure to welcome him today. Joining him, we'll have Eunjung Lim, who is an associate professor at the Division of International Studies at Gwangju National University in Korea. And she specializes in a range of comparative and global governance issues across East Asia, and she is also a director of the Korea Institute for Nuclear Nonproliferation and Control. It's my great pleasure to welcome both of them today, and so I'll turn the floor over to them now. I believe Ken is speaking first, so go ahead.
Thank you, Celeste, and thank you for having me speak here today. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is the North Korean leadership and what we've seen over the last several years, what some of the major takeaways about Kim Jong-un's leadership, and then how that's been affected by COVID in terms of what we think may have pretty much stayed the same or may have changed over that time period. We're now headed into the 9th year of the Kim Jong-un era. And as such, there are some things that are now coming into focus on how he runs the regime and the strategic and operational calculus that governs decision-making within North Korea. I think it is also becoming clear that he wants to take the regime where he wants to take the regime in the future. It is not cast in stone because the external factors or forces also get a vote, but it is also possible to speculate on where he may want to take the regime. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about his leadership style. This is not the Kim Jong-il regime. Oftentimes, especially within the Pyongyang community, watching community, we tend to talk about North Korea in terms of what we know and what we have seen in the past. And a lot of that is based on what we saw during the Kim Jong-il era. It is important to understand under Kim Jong-un that he is his own man, he is his own leader, he has his own calculus, he has his own horizon in which decisions are made. And there are definitely differences between the way that he runs the regime and the way that his father ran the regime. Although on the surface, early on, it looked like Kim Jong-un was patterning his style after his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, there are now elements of his own style, and his own unique style, that are beginning to percolate to the surface. He is putting his own stamp on the leadership, and that's been the important thing that really has happened over the last couple of years. As such, we cannot expect Kim Jong-un to act off of some worn-out playbook. This is another thing that the Pyongyang watching community tend to do a lot of, which is saying, oh, we have seen that before. I think we need to be careful about doing that when we're talking about Kim Jong-un, because I think that we may often be caught by surprise if we think that his motivations and his actions will be the same that his father or grandfather had. There are nuances. What may appear traditional could have a motive behind it that is very different. What is tactical in terms of his decision-making can actually be rather strategic. Kim Jong-un is more comfortable with delegating authority than his father and grandfather were, and but not power, authority, not power. It's two very different things. I'll talk about it in a second. In terms of his role as a decision maker, there is no question that Kim Jong-un is the ultimate decision maker in North Korea. He is the only decision maker that really counts as far as the outside world is concerned. He has resurrected many of the formal leadership structures. This is not where decisions are made. The Politburo is not a decision-making body. It is, and neither is the Central Military Commission. These are two bodies that we have seen quite a bit in terms of actually formally meeting. But they are where policies are discussed and where he articulates his vision. Party vice chairmen in North Korea have assumed a more authoritative role within the regime than their previous party secretary people who were party secretaries in the past had done. Authority for decision execution is being pushed down and proliferated within the second echelon of the leadership. This is leadership that Kim Jong-un trusts and owes his and they owe their loyalty to Kim Jong-un. That is something that we have really seen over the last couple of years of Kim putting his own people in power to a point now that he really trusts the leadership to take on the mantle of authority in carrying out some of policies. And there's a reason for that I will talk about in a second. One of the important things that we're seeing is that there is a change that is going on around the inner circle of power within North Korea right now. The reasons are various and probably tied to Kim Jong-un's age, his health, and desire to normalize the formal leadership ties and structures within the regime. Kim Jong-un has two primary objectives in which all of his decisions revolve around. No decision that he makes will violate either one of these objectives, and they are regime stability and perpetuation of Kim family rule. He will not make any decision in any arena unless it comports with those two primary objectives. He is isolating the power around the Kim family while pushing some authority down the chain of command. And this is a technique that ensures a wider buy-in in the leadership and prevents the development of pockets of power and rivalries, as we saw early on in the Kim Jong-un era that eventually were tied up in the eventual purge of his uncle, Chung Song-taek. The rise of Kim Yo-chung is part of this rewiring. She is not the number two in the regime, but she is a major gatekeeper and executor of her brother's policy. I don't think her absence from recent meetings is a sign of a demotion. I think she plays a very important role within the regime and will continue to play an important role. There's an increasing role of women in the upper reaches of the leadership inside North Korea. I think Kim Jong-un has a very strong comfort level with these women in terms of his trust in them. And he is able to spread his authority without diluting his power by working through them. The military and security apparatuses have been weakened from a power standpoint inside North Korea. The OGD, or the Organization Guidance Department, and the Ministry of State Security, two of these primary bodies which played a very important role under Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, have taken a hit as they have been cycled through in terms of leadership changes and demotions recently. The United Front Department and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have also been tamed. Within each, we see a dual-headed pairings within different chains of command. For example, we've seen Kim Yong-chol and Cho Sung-hui remaining as key advisors to Kim Jong-un, but they collaborate, but they also keep each other in check. Kim Jong-un's calculus. Below the strategic objectives of the regime survival and perpetuation of Kim family rule, the Pyongyang serves as the operational calculus in which the regime conducts its business. Within Pyongyang, it is my opinion that the economic part of Pyongyang is the more important part as far as Kim Jong-un's vision is concerned. That does not mean that the development of a nuclear deterrent isn't important. It is, especially for internal legitimacy purposes. But it does mean that Kim Jong-un will trade elements of that nuclear program, for the possibility of getting things such as sanctions relief, which will ultimately help on the economic side of the equation of Pyongyang. I think that's an important thing to see. And I think that is an important thing to think about when we look at what Kim does and does not do in the international environment. Sanctions relief trumps security guarantees for Kim Jong-un. It's calculus. This does not mean that Kim Jong-un needs sanctions relief to ensure regime survival. I think that especially now with the closing relationship and the tightening relationship between China and North Korea, that Kim Jong-un has the luxury of being able to defer some of the issues on security for the time being. But it makes things easier if he can engage South Korea and create some space between North Korea and China. I think that's ultimately what he wants to do, but he can't do that as long as the United States is not really playing ball with North Korea diplomatically, which it isn't right now. As for security guarantees, they are at the moment aspirational and would only make sense after a North Korean economy is on firm footing. So dealing with COVID, the pandemic has reinforced trends that we have seen distinguish Kim Jong-un in how he runs the regime from his father and grandfather. There, for example, is the admission of failure, which I think is an important aspect of the Kim Jong-un regime. At the August Central Committee meeting recently, Kim Jong-un admitted that the 5-year plan, which was set in motion in 2016, has pretty much been a failure and needs to be corrected, which I suspect we will see at the Party Congress in January. He has pushed pragmatism and accountability down the chain of command. The coronavirus has forced the country to shut down the border with China, which has accounted for more than 90% of North Korea's external trade. But it is beginning, I think, to open up in certain aspects, which North Korea will use to try to continue stability within the regime if they need. As North Korea's economic woes deepen, Kim Jong-un begun delegating some of his governing authority to his deputies at the second level, including Kim Yo-chung. After several years in power, I think Kim Jong-un wants to lessen the stress of governing. And another reason is I think he wants to spread the responsibility and lessen the political risk for himself should policies go wrong. One area where we have seen similarities between Kim Jong-un and how he runs his regime and how his predecessors did is in terms of internal security. Extraordinary measures have been taken to ensure that the country is locked down and any potential outbreak is contained. This has had unfortunate consequences, such as the shooting of a South Korean official. But as noted above, Kim Jong-un has handled this in a very different way than his predecessors did. In the fact that he apologized and basically reached out to South Korea following this incident. I think that is because he wants to maintain the ties externally because of hopes that there will be some attempts to engage diplomatically sometime in the future. And so I'll probably close there saying that Kim Jong-un is his own man. He is a very different leader. He is somebody that we need to take on his own merits and think about that he will run the regime differently. His calculus is different with a longer time horizon. It's an over the horizon time frame as opposed to his father who made decisions in a very tactical manner. And so I think there is the ability to engage with North Korea, but we have to do it understanding that he has certain requirements in order to re-engage with the outside world. It'll be interesting to see how the Biden administration handles that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken, for that overview. Eunjung, thank you for joining us this morning, or this evening for you, I guess, and please take it away.
Again, good morning to my friends, including Celeste and Yono and many others in Washington. And I'm very glad to join you today. I have been looking forward to this webinar as well. Even though I don't usually identify myself as a North Korea specialist, I'm doing more like just, international affair in this region. And I'm doing nuclear stuff. So relatively speaking, my knowledge might be much poorer than you guys, but I will try my best. And already Mr. Gauss very specifically provided some details about the changes in the North Korean leadership. He gave you lots of many different names, important names. So probably I won't repeat just the same things, but so rather I'd like to just highlight several block points. But before I just move on to my block points, one thing I want to just want to share again the theater state, that concept. As you probably remember, Clifford Geertz, he has that concept, theater state. North Korea, okay, it's up to your own interpretation, how you see the country. Is it just a irrational, just theatrical player in this region, or just it's a super rational and realistic, hyper realistic state? It's totally up to your own interpretation. But this year is if you just recall the memory, the scene of 1010, the military parade, which was held on October 10th to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the establishment of Workers' Party. It was another, I think, memorable event, probably for North Korean people, not only for them, and for us as well, who just try to analyze their behavior or their intention. It was another, again, the good example, good showcase to present how would you say, that character, again, the theater state. So again, here, the main character, of course, was the Kim Jong-un. And the two names we probably need to remember. Again, the Lee Byung-chul and Park Chung-chun, the two marshals. And they were just riding on how would you describe that car, military car, and their gestures, all the things were pretty much reminiscent of old cliche. To me, to be very honest, Celeste, you are comparing Japan and Korea also, but I'm also doing a comparison between Japan and Korea, Korea and Japan. And those things are really reminiscent of a pre-war Japan, as you probably agree. They are riding on white horses, So it's another that kind of scene. North Korea, of course, they have been always like that, but this specific year, even though they have lots of difficulty, including COVID outbreak, even though they won't say, they have officially, they have zero confirmed case, but still they have lots of difficulty because of this situations, again, the COVID outbreak, and also typhoon, natural disaster. They also experienced severe typhoon this year, which was also pretty much negatively affecting on the North Korea's economy, obviously. So even though they have those kind of difficulty on 10/10, again October 10, they re-show the theater state. So how should we understand or interpret all the things? So now let me go to the 3 block points. Number one, I will argue, of course I can be wrong, but I'll argue Kim Jong-un's leadership is pretty stable regardless of what happened, regardless of COVID, regardless of typhoon, or regardless of whatever, right? Whatever his leadership is, it looks like very stable. We did have lots of conspiracy theories, especially this year. Kim Yo-jong might have been demoted, or she might have been even eliminated from those circle of the power, or even Kim Jong-un himself. We were just doubtful about his health. That some others, like a kind of weird YouTubers, they made a so-called fake news. Kim Jong might have been already dead, and the one who is just playing his role. That we got lots of conspiracies theory, especially this year. Of course, this year was not the unique year exception. It was not the exceptional year, but especially this year we got lots of conspiracy theories. But what I'm trying to say is, I would say Kim Jong-un's leadership looks very stable. The reason why I will say so is, again, he has been pretty much ruthless to any potential challenges, including, again, the Chang Song-taek or Kim Jong-nam or whoever can be challenging against his power. He already executed. And he absolutely promoted so-called loyalist clans. Again, the Lee Byung-chul and Park Jong-chun are, I think, a good example to back up that kind of, again, the interpretations. So those two really pretty much dramatically promoted to that level, again, the martial level. As you probably remember, Lee Byung-chul actually skipped the one step, and he just directly went to the martial level. So which is not that, again, the common in the North Korean society. So these things, again, I think are good evidences to back up my that hypothesis. Again, the Kim Jong-un's leadership still pretty much stable. And having said that, I would like to highlight my second point. Again, he can be probably more patient than us. Here, us refers to South Korean leadership. He already got the nuclear capacity. It's a pretty much, of course, it depends on your own analysis. Again, how many warheads they have, or how really capable, how precisely, again, all this missile can fly over. All the things are still, pretty much open to the many different analyses. But still, one thing I can clearly say that is, again, that their nuclear capacity is way beyond, as much more developed than before, right? Than the years of Kim Jong-il, as we all know. So having had that kind of rear nuclear capacity, and having had the pretty much stable, firm leadership surrounding him, because in the North Korean society, it's highly unlikely to expect those so-called bottom-up uprising, people's uprising. It cannot be just happening in North Korean society. So as long as he can control over the leadership surrounding him, he can be, I think, pretty much okay. So that is why I will argue that, again, that he does have probably more time or more flexibility, or he can be more probably patient with all the situations. And the third point, that's the last point I want to highlight, is, again, it might be an answer to kind of potential questions from today's audience as well. Again, why are they silent over the Biden's the election result in the United States? Of course, even in the United States, there are lots of arguments over the result. So legally speaking, we still need to be waiting for the final outcome. So having had that kind of pretty much confusing, complex situations, they probably don't want to and don't need to stimulate unnecessarily Washington. There might be one just hypothetical answer. But the third point will be related to my earlier point. Again, the second point, they can be probably more patient than us, again, the South Korea, because we are running out of time here, because Moon Jae-in's leader, even though he He does have a pretty much strong domestic support, but still his time, as we all know, as the clock is ticking. So only almost probably 1 year is left for this government. And we cannot be that sure that the success of Moon Jae-in will be, again, just succeeding his North Korean or inter-Korean relations policy. So having said that, having had the 3 bullet points, my one last comment will be, definitely Seoul and Washington, especially next year. I think next year will be another like a very important year. It can be very challenging, and at the same time, it can be a good opportunity too. So I hope Washington and Seoul and Washington can talk more and can share a common strategy to deal with the North Korea's related issues. Again, thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry I just spent lots of time. Sorry about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eunjung. I'd like to dive right into some of the economic discussions now with our next set of panelists. So let me introduce them. We'll begin with Bill Brown. He has a long experience working in the government. He's currently principal of a consulting company. He specialized in his work for the government in economics as well as other aspects of Northeast Asia. And he has published a number of different analysis pieces about money and markets in North Korea and the economic situation there. He will be followed by Professor Im Chul, who is an associate professor and the director of the ICNK Center at Institute for Far Eastern Studies at Kyungnam University in Korea. He also has served in a variety of government advisory functions and has worked in the Department of North Korea for the Korea Trade and Investment Promotion Agency. So without further ado, let's turn to Bill for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. It's great to be here. And it's actually very fun to be on a panel with some political people. We don't usually do that. And I think it may offer a great ability to have a good discussion on the leadership, how the leadership deals with the economy. I might push back a little bit on that in that my thinking is that Kim Jong-un is under great strain right now. So I'm not sure the patience is quite the right word. But anyway, we can talk about that. I think to me, the North Korean economy right now, the pandemic or not, it's under great strain. I have some slides. Maybe I'll show them. I don't want to dwell on the slides, but I think they might be helpful, especially to the Korean speakers. So I like to make these 7 points. There's 7 points, I think. And then we can dig into them a little bit more. The first one is we should remember that just in 2017, 2018, Kim was raising expectations among the population of economic prosperity. Speeches, and he sounded very optimistic, getting rid of Pyongyang, moving toward economic progress. But just last month in October and in August, he's making these speeches that, oh my gosh, it's a failure. The plan was a failure. He apologizes. Instead of talking globalism, he's talking self-reliance. So a big change there in the way he's presenting his situation to his own people. A second, more general point I like to make is it's weak productivity, not the lack of resources, that makes North Korea one of the poorest countries in the world. To me, this is very important. They have a lot of resources. And by that, I mean natural resources, but also a lot of human capital, a lot of physical capital. The system just makes very poor use of it. That's why it's weak productivity, very poor country. Third point is these UN sanctions and the pandemic closings are having a huge impact. External trade seems to be about zero, an amazing situation. I'm thinking their trade with the rest of the world is less than maybe you have to go back to the Yi Dynasty to see how little it is. I guess I'm supposed to say Chosun Dynasty. The monetary system, the North Korean won, is amazingly stable. Kim has stabilized the monetary system compared to his father and grandfather. But he's done it, I think, by squeezing the budget, squeezing monetary policy. So it has an extremely tight monetary policy. Anyway, we can talk about that a little bit. That's hurting the government, I think. The pandemic controls, on the other hand, are stifling, I'm afraid they're stifling this emergent market activity. And the sad thing is I expect a lot of people in Pyongyang like that. So I want to talk about that. I think there's good political reasons for shutting that border. Is there hope for reform? Of course, there's always hope. I'm actually fairly optimistic because this bottom-up markets, I think, are gradually taking over, but we're still lacking the top-down support for that's vitally needed. And lastly, I'm thinking this new party Congress in January and the new plan that they need to put forward may give us some big new hints. If we talk about specifically the impact of the pandemic, remember this is after a huge cutback in trade has already happened with the sanctions. So it's sort of another layer of hit. I'm thinking the border closing since January has greatly reduced the availability of Chinese consumer products in the North Korean economy. That might sound kind of good, no consumer, but not for the people, North Korean people need sugar, they want tobacco. All kinds of products from China they've been importing have stopped because of the pandemic. The traders are losing a lot of money. I think private employment is endangered. There's no investment going on, and basically a decline in living standards. Now, one of the problems is the government probably benefits from all this. Less outflow of foreign exchange, less competition for the state, stronger controls on the population. In the longer term, though, the economy by now really depends on these markets. Their new plan will need a lot of imports, and the imports need exports. And right now they're not getting either. And opens the door for financial instability, which I think may be coming. Just a couple points on markets. We like to talk about markets. I won't go into all these, but my view, they've made a lot of progress in goods and services markets. I highlight the labor market here because I think that's the crux of the problem right now. There's a huge problem with their labor market. And now, just in the last week or two, foreign exchange markets look problematic. I want to get into that a little bit. This is trade. Their trade, is mostly with China, as Ken Gauss said. I like to think of this is since 2015, 3 phases here. The first phase, during the UN sanctions, but China really wasn't on board, and they were really kind of very ineffective, I thought. So trade was actually growing with China during that period. But then in 2017, late 2016, 2017, China climbed on board these UN sanctions and really pretty much smashed their imports from North Korea, North Korean exports. So this is the reverse here. This is Chinese exports, of course, are North Korean imports. You can see on that light colored line, right? I don't know if you can see my arrow. This sharp drop in North Korean exports to China in 2017 and 2018. But they weren't really, if you look at the second, so the first period is growing trade with China. The second period through last year is very weak North Korean exports, almost nothing, but continued North Korean imports. Now, during this period, there's a big change in the composition. In the earlier period, North Korea imported a lot of machinery and equipment, investment products, and consumer products. In the latter part, they stopped importing industrial equipment, but kept importing consumer products. That kept the population, relatively happy. Since 2020, 2020, though, with this pandemic and this closing, what's happened is North Korean imports have taken a beating. So with the border closed, they're not importing almost anything. Right now, that means almost no trade. You can look at that from a balance of payments or trade perspective, flow of funds perspective. In that earlier period, you see kind of balanced trade because North Korean exports were growing strong. $150 million a month deficit on the trade, probably offset by about that much surplus on services. But then since 17 to 20, you have this huge trade deficit to $150 million a month, outflow of foreign exchange. The interesting thing now, though, is in this year, with this border closing, they're not buying anything, so they're not spending that money. So the balance of payments looks a little better, actually, with the pandemic. And I'm sure the authorities kind of like that. In this period, they've managed to keep the yuan stable, extraordinarily stable. And I have some theories as to why. Basically, I think it's just a theory, but I think they tighten the controls on yuan. So if dollars are flowing out, they're not printing any yuan either. So there's less dollars and less yuan. Keeps the relative value in parallel safe, but and eliminates inflation. But it really pushes the economy into a recession. It's like they have extremely high interest rates. They don't use interest rates, but there are other ways to do that, and that's what I think they're doing here. Now, kind of a really interesting point just in the last couple of weeks, and I don't want to dwell on it because it's so new. I don't know that the data is correct, but two different sources have reported a huge rise in the value of yuan. This is the value of the dollar against the yuan. So a drop is means a rise in the yuan, drop in the dollar. So that the dollar dropped sharply in North Korea in the last week, like 25%. Amazing drop after all this stability. So people say, well, maybe people are betting against the US. That doesn't work because it dropped even more. This is the same scale, dropped even more against Chinese yuan. Wow. Why on earth would yuan be rising against Chinese yuan? Now, there's problems with it because the cross rate, you can make a ton of money on the cross rate right now, meaning the dollar has gone way up against the yuan in North Korea. But guess what? The rest of the world has gone down. So if you can make some trades there, you can make a lot of money. Now, just the last thing I want to mention is, what's in the future for us. Of course, I think we all want North Korea to reform and open the way the Chinese have done. It's a Chinese construct, and to me, the order is extremely important, and I think it's lost on a lot of people. To me, you reform before you open. North Korea, in effect, opened in the mid-1970s. It opened up to trade with the West quite a lot, but it didn't reform, and it was a catastrophic failure. They went in default, and they've been in default on their debt ever since. They need to reform first to make it safe to open. Right now, I would argue to Kim, your economy is not safe to open. Reform first. Here's just some points I mean by reform. Unify the price system. They've got this crazy dual price system. It's killing their socialist system. Decollectivize agriculture, absolutely. Collectivized agriculture has caused famines everywhere they've had. It's an incredibly bad system. And for some reason they can't quite do it, but they need to move ahead with that. And all these other points. But another one is they need, I think, to start selling some of the state's assets, using that money to buy back their own, pay their workers more, get rid of this dual price system. Anyway, a bunch of issues there for us, I think, to discuss.
Great.
One last thing is, you can look at my slides here on this second. I have this website. I put these slides and some other articles in aeia.org. You can see them there.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. We're going to turn now to Emil Chul, who will be presenting also about the economic factors when we examine North Korea in the COVID era. Thank you.
반갑습니다. 저는
Good morning or good evening. My name is Imul Chul, who is studying the North Korean economy in South Korea. I've been studying the subject for 29 years.
윌리엄 브라운 씨 발표를
I just listened to Bill's presentation,
제가 알고 있는 내용하고 중복되는 것도 있고
and I can say there are some overlap between you and me, and of course, there are some different aspects between you and me.
올해 북한 경제를 관찰하는 데 있어서
This year, when we have the outlook for the North Korean economy, the most important factor is COVID-19 pandemic. That is the most important factor.
북한 연구자들은
In Korea, there are many people who study about North Korea, and usually we use four methods so that we can assess the situation in North Korea, especially about the North Korean economy. COVID-19 may have some impact on the North Korean economy. That is the key topic that we are studying these days in Korea, and we are using four factors. The factor number one is the trade volume between China and North Korea. The factor number two is the FX rate. And the factor number three is the price or the inflation rate in the North Korean market. Last but not least, the fourth factor is there are many North Korean defectors who are currently in South Korea, and the North Korean defectors can describe their experiences. So, as a person who is studying the North Korean economy, when we have the interview with the North Korean defectors, we can listen to what is actually going on in North Korea. And probably that is something unique in Korea because the people outside of Korea cannot have the direct interview with the North Korean defectors outside of South Korea. There has been sanction on North Korea. However, sanctions impact on the North Korean economy is, what should I say, the North Korean people get accustomed to it because the sanction has been prolonged. So the market has been in the process of overcoming the impact coming from the sanction itself. However, the COVID-19 is unprecedented and that is unexpected. It has a huge impact on the North Korean economy for sure. Because when you are trying to do the economic activity, you should be able to move around. Mobility is that important. However, because of the COVID-19 within the North Korean market, the movement of the North Korean merchant is pretty much limited in the North Korean market. That's why it has a huge impact on the economic activity in North Korea and the market in North Korea. The merchant in the North Korean economy need to have a trade with China. Only then the supply and the demand can be met and they can provide some of the stuff to the consumers, but they do not have the trade with China now. So everything is virtually stopped in the North Korean economy. And because of that, the overall North Korean market is being contracted. Up until last year, we estimated that the North Korean economy is on the recovery path, even though they are under the strict sanction. However, they were on the path for the recovery. The reason I can tell you is because the manufacturing was quite strong in North Korea. They would like to produce many things in DPRK. Kim Jong-un pushing for the Made in DPRK initiative, and many things started to be produced in North Korea. Of course, the raw material and the intermediate goods were imported from China, and then they try to boost their manufacturing, and the so-called made in North Korean products increased significantly. So the footing for the North Korean manufacturing got much better and the factory utilization got better. However, because of the COVID-19, the manufacturing sector had a hard hit. The manufacturing utilization or the manufacturing uptime went down significantly. By the end of the 2019, what Kim Jong-un focused on was the tourism industry. However, the tourism industry got a hard hit. They built a large tourism specialized zone in North Korea. They tried to solicit some of the Chinese tourists to North Korea, and many of the Chinese people actually visited North Korea, which means many foreign currency benefit to North Korea. According to our estimation, the volume was around 200 to 300 million USD as a tourism income for North Korea. Before the COVID-19, the trade volume between China and North Korea boosted the toll manufacturing. What I mean by toll manufacturing is in North Korea, you get the order from China and the assembly shall be done in North Korea and the final product will be sent to North Korea. That kind of toll processing and the toll manufacturing was on the boom. However, after the COVID-19, after the trade was stopped, the toll manufacturing is virtually stopped in North Korea. And that had a huge impact on the North Korean market. As Mr. William Brown said, and you talked about the statistics about the trade volume between China and North Korea. In the January to the June this year, it dropped by 73%, including import and export. 73% drop. And between May and July, the drop was relatively small, but in other months, the drop was close to 90%. And it had huge impact on the North Korean market. And those who study North Korea in Korea also study some unofficial trading, including the smuggling. And I believe the smuggling and the unofficial trading is accounting for quite a bit among the total volume of the whole trade. However, because of the COVID-19, almost all the smuggling activities or unofficial trading activities stopped. Of course, if you need something from the central government, or if there is any material that is really necessary for the military, as far as I understand, some of the smuggling is being made or unofficial trading is made so that they can secure some of the stuff that isn't necessary for the central government and for the military. However, the trading activities for the market itself has been virtually stopped. Let me put it this way in the interest of time. Mr. William Brown told us that you talked about the FX rate. The North Korean won value is going up according to what you say. And this is something then we need to focus because this is something unique in the North Korean market. The won value started to go up after the COVID-19. After the pandemic globally began, especially in February and March. Starting from February and March, the won's value started to go up against other currencies. This is something that I am really paying attention to because in the North Korean market, when you buy something in the market, usually USD or the renminbi or the won were used. However, for the last a few months, it has changed significantly. And in the North Korean market, people want to buy and sell with their won instead of USD or renminbi, which means even among the North Korean citizens, they have higher trust about their own currency. Of course, people prefer USD and the North Korean won. However, the people have a huge trust about the North Korean won. That is why their value is going up against the USD and Chinese renminbi. Let me briefly touch upon the food sector. The rice price has been fluctuating a lot in the North Korean market. However, the rice price is quite stable, even though there has been some fluctuation, which means the North Korean government is actively engaging in controlling their FX rate and inflation and price level. If there was no control from the central government of the North Korea, probably the FX and the inflation might not have been stabilized after the COVID-19. However, because of the active engagement of the central government, FX rate and the inflation rate has been stabilized because those two factors are directly related to the daily lives of the North Korean citizens. I needed to talk about the fertilizer and the import of the fertilizer, and also I needed to talk about the energy supply and demand, but I am running out of time. So probably during the discussion, let me touch upon for those two topics. Last but not least, COVID-19 has a huge impact on the North Korean market and economy. However, some factors are really stable in North Korea, even though the supply from the external sources is going down. However, the demand is going down as well. So so-called downward stability is being made. The trade between China has been stopped, so the supply dropped significantly. And the North Korean people do not want many things. The demand is going down. So on the downward side, the supply and demand is being stabilized. The FX and inflation are also stabilized. That's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Im. We're going to turn now to the public health portion of our discussion today. Let me introduce our speakers. First, we'll have Ji-ho Cha, who is a physician who has long experience working in non-governmental organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières and government organizations, including the South Korean Ministry of Unification and other groups with North Korean marginalized populations. He is currently affiliated as a senior lecturer in humanitarian studies at the University of Manchester in the UK. Joining him on this panel will be Dr. Ki Pak, who's a member of the faculty at the Harvard Medical School. He has visited North Korea more than 20 times to support North Korean doctors and has published and spoken widely about the medical sector in North Korea, and he has also worked with various governmental and non-governmental organizations in supporting public health in North Korea. So let me turn it over to Dr. Cha now.
Thank you for sharing your insight on the political and economic impact of the pandemic in North Korea. And as a global health and health system scholar, working especially in the North Korean context and maybe from the other fragile countries, those kind of insight is very useful to think on the public health issue. So because as you expected, public health issue never can be separated with the economic and political system. And so in this today I would like to briefly address how these political and especially economic impact are ultimately resulting in the public health of the people in this. So let me share some slide. So as you see, this level of the pandemic is not historically new, but I believe human immobility from the lockdown is kind of new in the human history, leading the bridging function of the basic economy, which many people rely on at the moment. And if those kind of lockdown is happened in the North America or Europe or East Asia, the social kind of the economic resilience system can be reserve those kind of impact to be directly impact on the people who are those who are marginalized in the society. But in North Korea or the other fragile country, those kind of impact of the lockdown and the economic depression has a much more direct impact on the people's health issue. But it is a bit difficult to estimate what is actually happening in North Korea. So today I would like to address a bit more on the what is the vulnerability or resilience of the North Korean health system against to the COVID-19 and those in the impact of the lockdown. So let me first think about the COVID-19 resilience. And many people after COVID-19 and happened in China, and they ask me, actually whether there is the case, COVID-19 case or not in North Korea. And because, like you, I'm not in the Pyongyang and Yangon or the other province, and it is very difficult to answer those questions. And if I was there in North Korea, there is no such a systematic surveillance system to detect COVID-19 in North Korea. That is not only issue in the North Korea. There are many sub-Saharan African countries or Middle East. They cannot fully assess the magnitude of the COVID-19 infection in their community. So we do not need to consider North Korea is a single country to expose those kind of difficulty. But anyway, for the health system perspective, but I could see the strong resilience against the COVID-19 in North Korea. Meanwhile, there is some vulnerability. And so, for example, and as you expected, strong political system in North Korea and the very quick decision making, the kind of process, and it enabled the North Korean government to respond very rapid epidemic response especially with the highly centralized decision making system. So first there is the political priority on the COVID-19 impact. And also there is the Public Health Act, Public Health Law, which are very well organized system to respond to those kind of the outbreak control. And on the other hand, based on those kind of the strong health system or preparedness system for the outbreak, along with that, the strong political priority on this issue, the North Korea is one of the first country to close their border, even in the very 21st January and 2020. And then the strict quarantine of the foreigner or those in the contact with these individual happened in the very large size. And so on top of those kind of rapid epidemic response, and there is the existing extensive health system along with the extensive network of the human resource and facility. So for example, as you wondering how North Korean can screen or detect the COVID-19. There is no such a PCR kit in the rural area, but there is the community doctors with the average one per the 134 household and examining anyone with a fever or respiratory symptom. So they can be, if there is symptom, they can be easily isolated. But it is not applicable for the asymptomatic kind of patient. But anyway, it is one of the good system to screen the people and isolate. And also the health education message were promoted widely, especially in the northern cities, which near the border in between the China and North Korea. And also National Reference Laboratory in later stage in Pyongyang had some PCR test kit from the China. And but still we don't know there is actually case or not, because there is also risk factor on, I can see that it is one of the vulnerability to the COVID-19. And for example, demographic and epidemiological risk, there is largest, North Korea has the largest proportion of the elderly people in the Southeast Asia region of the WHO. It means that they are a bit more vulnerable, not only to be impacted, but also to, if they impacted, they will have a bit more severe prognosis on their symptom. And also there is related to the elderly people, there is a high prevalence of the non-communicable disease, for example, cardiovascular disease. And on the other hand, as you know, the malnutrition in North Korea is very severe, so make people very weak to those kind of infection. And so those kind of things are resulting in the high prevalence of the another communicable disease like tuberculosis. And on the other hand, there is a risk of the hidden transmission. And so North Korea, they strictly control the border, and also they strictly kind of the screening those who have a symptom, but still there is informal market function and cross-border trade, especially if the border is highly controlled. And but the people's reliance on those kind of the informal market make people move in between the border. But and on top of that, because it is the uh, political priority to control the COVID-19 in North Korea. So those who are impacted actually in contact of those in smuggler or those kind of things, they cannot reveal, they disclose themselves as impacted. So that can be the risk of the hidden transmission. And however, I learned from the Dr. Lim, Eunchul Lim, and on the because the North Korea have a more strict control of the even for the smuggling or those kind of illegal trade, and so I think it have a minimum impact at this stage. And more importantly, in last spring when China have a huge COVID-19 the outbreak, at that time I was really concerning on those kind of cross-border movement. But now COVID-19 in China is a bit stabilized. There is very less risk of the hidden transmission, I think. But my major concern is not the COVID-19 itself, but because North Korea have a huge lockdown measure and to protect their people. So I have a concern on the impact of the lockdown on the people's public health issue. And so, as you know, under kind of the last decade, the marketization and under economic crisis, and socialist health system also was supposed to be scaled back because North Korea do not have enough kind of health financing resource to support their socialist system. And also combined with the international sanction, those kind of health financing crisis being chronic. So in these cases, the informal health market with the market mechanism is emerging and expanded largely. And currently I found the economic barrier is the most significant barrier to especially in this informal health sector. So based on my kind of the healthcare utilization survey show the out-of-pocket expenditure in current system, the medical consultation or medicine and medical supply or other costs, there are huge out-of-pocket money are needed. And on the other hand, resource for those kind of informal medical costs are relying on the black market work or informal or market work. So in this case, as you can see, what is the impact of the lockdown on the North Korean public health? Because market itself, they're instabilized, and as your comment on the Dr. Rim and Dr. Brown, those kind of market function is a bit instabilized and impact on the local kind of the livelihood of especially those who are relying on the informal market system. Those people, or majority of those people are a bit socially marginalized and do not have enough kind of the higher political status. So that increased a lot of the economic inequality in North Korea to access public health the kind of the measures and also some essential medicine. So in table 3 in the presentation, and it is the example of my previous research, and not only for the political status but also economic status like household wealth or household income or engagement market business, all of that are negatively associated with the access to healthcare. So I'm concerned on the economic impact of the lockdown can be more important in current public health in North Korea, because we don't know the actual number of the COVID-19, but we know how much North Korea actively engaged to those kind of lockdown or public health measure. And I have a concern on that. And as I mentioned earlier, it is not only issue of the North Korea. The other kind of the developing country or country of the humanitarian crisis, they also exposed to those kind of impact of the lockdown. And then their humanitarian needs or basic public health needs are aggravating a lot. So I hope this forum, we can integrate our insight to see the COVID-19 impact on the North Korean society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cha. And last but not least, we'll turn it over to Dr. Ki Pak now.
Thanks, Celeste. First, let me just thank Yono for the invitation. And I learned a lot so far from hearing from all the speakers. And any discussion that involves North Korea and COVID has to have public health speakers. And I'm delighted to see actually there's two, Dr. Chai, myself in this panel. And I think a lot of my talk will actually complement what Dr. Cha has mentioned. So I'm gonna dive into that question once again that Dr. Cha tried to answer, which is, do they or do they not have COVID in North Korea, right? And as he mentioned, North Korea was one of the first countries to close its borders. They do have a nationwide national anti-epidemic plan. And then they instituted nationwide education and strict measures early on. And then there's that 880-mile porous border between China and North Korea. And if you look at the numbers of cases actually in those two provinces in China, they're in the hundreds, a couple of hundred that's the most number, and only a couple of deaths. And these are millions of people that live in those provinces. So statistically speaking, the risk is really minimal. And then someone had mentioned this question about the Russian border, which is much shorter. But if you look at the province in Russia that borders North Korea, there are actually 18,000 cases in that province. So that has potentially more of a risk for North Korea than the Chinese border along the China. And I want to mention that for North Korea, they see any kind of introduction of external elements, and I'm talking about defectors or boats that sort of drift ashore, even leaflets from South Korea, or even pollution from China. They see that as a potential for introduction of the virus to their country. So when they see someone drifting on the ocean that's not part of North Korean people, it's a national threat. It's not just another person trying to come in. And you just have to kind of think about the way North Korea sees that. And then don't forget, North Korea also had experience with SARS and Ebola, right? This is not their first rodeo. And I just want to talk a little bit about their testing capacity and capability. They do have the gold standard, the PCR test machine. It's at the central laboratory in Pyongyang. I'm not sure, but they may have actually gotten additional machines in the other provinces as well. Their volume of testing has dramatically increased in the month of October. They tested up to about 3,000 total until September, starting January. But since October, the number has gone well over 12,000 cumulative. So there's been a dramatic uptick in number of testing. And then what can we say about the North Korea's level of confidence and how their measures are working? You can look at some of the things that they're doing. For instance, those massive public gatherings that they had in October and also in June. That gives you some idea of how their level of their confidence and how these measures are working. So the takeaway for me is we should not be so quick to dismiss their claims that there are no cases of COVID. I think this is more likely than not. I think they're doing a really good job with that. But the other side of that coin is what Dr. Cha had mentioned. There are wider implications of this prolonged lockdown and isolation policies. And he talked about it very nicely. The number one concern I have is the increase in poverty levels. Poverty kills, and he actually showed that in the different socioeconomic classes. There's also degradation of health system due to supply chain issues, essential health services, delays in seeking care. People aren't going to the hospital like they used to. And then don't forget, in DPRK context, the humanitarian aid has almost come to a virtual stop. There's almost no programming going on inside North Korea. And remember who humanitarian groups target: the most vulnerable population of DPR Korea, right? So we actually did a preliminary modeling, and we think as many as 93,000 excess deaths can actually expected in North Korea as a result of non-COVID related, but the policies to prevent COVID from entering, and from the reasons I gave above. And if you compare that with the only modeling study that I'm aware of that actually looks at the worst case scenario in DPR Korea, if the COVID were to come into North Korea, this is from Imperial College, and they're estimating a worst case scenario of 150,000 deaths due to a large COVID outbreak. So it's pretty clear over time, as this pandemic rages on, that the human cost of maintaining these isolation policies will be far greater than the COVID itself. So how might things develop in the near to medium future? I actually happen to believe that there are actually opportunities as a result of this pandemic. And there's a need for a great reset, especially in addressing the human conditions in North Korea. You know, if you look at global health security, the idea is that there are no enemies between US and North Korea or any other parts of the world. It's a global health security. The threat is outside of us. It's a virus. So really, we talk about it. We're only as secure as our weakest link. No one is safe until everybody is safe, and we get that. And herein lies the sort of the key into cooperation and engaging with North Korea on a cooperative level. You saw this before, and there were letters exchanged between President Trump with President Kim saying we're offering assistance. Chairman Kim actually sent a letter to President Moon Jae-in during February, expressing his concern when there was an outbreak of cases. You see this. So there are, I think, 4 things I want to mention about a great reset, especially in the post-COVID environment. One, whatever happens, it has to be a comprehensive approach. I don't think these fragmented individual project type of assistance is going to work. You need sanctions relief. Let's face it. You can't have a sanction where you have to have humanitarian exemptions in place in times of a global public health emergency. It's absurd, right? It makes no sense. It has to be sanctions relief, banking channels, logistical, financial, and all those barriers have to be taken away. It has to be a multi-stakeholder approach for a couple of reasons. From North Korea perspective, bilateral assistance is a bit sensitive because it goes up and down due to political climate. Multilateral approach is much safer and it's much more stable, less likely to be influenced by individual actors. The package has to be large enough to get everybody's attention. It should be an unprecedented level of assistance. And then lastly, it has to address North Korea's current level of fear. Nothing's going to happen in DPRK, economic-wise, military-wise, until the COVID issue is resolved. What that means is that they need a provision of massive testing capacity, right? In fact, enough testing capacity to help install a nationwide testing protocol. They need massive amounts of medical countermeasures, hospital equipment, ventilators, oxygen concentrators, all the latest drugs to treat COVID, if you will. They need all that. And most importantly, I think the vaccine, promise of an equitable access to vaccine is absolutely essential. Without that, any discussion with DPRK would be a non-starter. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pak and Dr. Cha, for that. As you saw in the discussion or the description of the North Korea Economic Forum, one of our objectives is to provide balanced, well-researched, and multidisciplinary insights on North Korea. And I think we got a really great flavor of that from today's panel. So thank you very much for all of your presentations. For the sake of time, I'm going to delve right into the questions from our audience members, and feel free to continue to submit questions. Maybe we can work backwards from the public health to the economic to the political. in the question. So let me start out. We had two questions about the Emergency Anti-Epidemic Committee that was formed in North Korea to sort of be the spearhead in terms of addressing the pandemic. Who's on this committee, do you know? And do you have a sense of how much power has been delegated or devolved to it? How involved is Kim Jong-un in the committee decision-making? Several of you mentioned how quick decision-making is one hallmark of North Korean leadership style. Any insights here in terms of the political responses to this pandemic?
Let me first to answer the question. Actually, it's a bit difficult to what member exactly inside those kind of committee, but based on the Public Health Act law, and that it is a bit well organized system, and with the in the balance of the public health or medical expert as well as some political party member, and because as you see the our kind of the COVID-19 experience outside North Korea, in East Asia and Europe and USA, we always need those kind of the combination of the political leadership and also public health scholar to respond effectively on the kind of the issue to prevent COVID-19. And so I have some kind of the, in terms of their kind of response, and as a result, the anti-epidemic result is very well organized and very active. And also there is some kind of merit from the North Korea's highly controlled society. And so it is the kind of the worst kind of the context for the COVID-19 virus to be survived or to be spread in the North Korea. But on the other hand, I still found some kind of the scholarly voice inside North Korea, like a North Korean professor or public health scholars, and their level of the engagement in the general health policy or healthcare reform is not kind of the currently kind of the enough. And so maybe it is depending on the North Korea, the kind of the public health decision-making process, but also it is related to some kind of technical capacity of the public health scholar, because they are also isolated for a long time under international sanction. So I keep kind of the insisting how to respond to COVID-19. It is global crisis. As Dr. Park mentioned, if any country remains to have a COVID-19, and COVID-19 cannot be kind of finished. So it is why we have some kind of the more solidarity in terms of the COVID-19 issue to respond together on the COVID-19, and it needs some kind of the public health collaboration in between North Korea and to strengthening the technical capacity of those public health scholars inside North Korea and to translate their knowledge into the actual policy impact. So that is my the answer. Yeah.
So I might add to that. I think the question is excellent. You know, there's this committee, right? The Anti-Epidemic Committee. And because of it's such a high priority, and for North Korea, it's a matter of national survival, that committee is very high level. In fact, I believe Chairman Kim is on that committee or something, because whenever they talk about COVID, he's always in there. And herein lies the problem, you know, because this is a public health problem and it has to be driven by public health specialists. If this sounds familiar to the US situation, I think it is. And I've actually spoken to some people who are familiar with the situation saying they're frustrated with the securitization of the public health response more than the actual science-based, you know, and evidence-based. If you look at quarantining of foreigners, it's 40 days, and that's not really the accepted norm. And they actually quarantining handlers of cargo for 10 days, and cargo sits on the docks for 10 days. So these are some of the measures that are probably not so evidence-based, but it's being decided at a very high level, probably out of more fear and security reasons more than science.
Great, thank you very much. I think one thing that we definitely get from the presentations today is that the mobility that has fueled the market response in North Korea, sort of coping with sanctions and coping with earlier famine situations has been really constrained during this time. I wonder if you could speak to the economic panel today, if you could speak to where North Korea fits in as the region moves forward with such economic cooperation plans like the one announced yesterday, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and any sort of prospect for opening the border with China, for example, or as Dr. Pak mentioned, accessing the vaccine, for example, from China.
Okay, yeah, it's a good question, but I think you got to look at however you interpret how accurate the Chinese trade data is. It's almost unimaginable right now. I think that's the one area Mr. Lim and I would agree. I disagree with a lot of what he said, but the one area that we would agree that right now, in October, November 2020, North Korea's trade relations with the entire world is at rock bottom. I mean, really, truly terrible. So the idea of integration with the rest of Asia is kind of feckless talk right now until something happens in North Korea that allows it to mend fences with the rest of the world. It's not just the US, it's not just South Korea, it's not just China, it's the whole world is not willing to trade or invest with North Korea except through illicit kind of ways. So I'm not, I think the onus is on Kim. It's very clear if Kim will make some changes. I would argue that it's not just the nuclear business, it's maybe even more importantly, the economic reforms he needs to put in place that would allow him to trade normally with the rest of the world. But until he does that, nothing's going to happen.
제가 좀 추가로 설명을 하겠습니다.
Let me add on a little bit.
사실 이제 그 북한의 김정은 위원장은
And actually, Chairman Kim Jong-un
중국에 대한 그 의존도를 줄이는 것이
wanted to reduce the dependence on the Chinese economy. That is one of the key goals for his economic policy.
16년이죠.
It was in 2016
당 대회를 열어서
when he has the seventh party convention. He made an announcement for the 5-year economic development plan. And the 5-year economic plan's main agenda is to reduce the dependence on the Chinese economy. And Chairman Kim came up with a set up a policy. For example, they wanted to have the diversification for the trading partners, not just with China, which means they want to have more trading partners. For example, Russia and the Southeast Asia. They wanted to have the trade boost, especially with the Southeast Asia. At least that was the plan made in 2016. However, starting from 2017, North Korea focused on the nuclear and the missile development, and the sanction from the international society became even stronger. So the diversification of the trading partner was not that successful because of the international sanction, because sanction was too strong, so he was not able to expand his trading partners. North Korean dependence on China when it comes to trade is around 95%. Among the total trade, the dependence to China is 95%. It is an absolutely huge number. They are almost totally dependent on China. And just if the vaccine is developed and the vaccine can be distributed, it is high time for North Korea to buy some vaccine from China. They do not have any other channel. And as far as I know, there has been some contract negotiation. Maybe they already have the contract between North Korea and China for the vaccine supply. And I believe securing the vaccine can be one of the top priorities for North Korea. And as for North Korea, and before the COVID-19 is fully finished or before the COVID-19 goes away, there will not be any significant move from North Korea because once they have the COVID-19 patients in North Korea, North Korea have to lock down their borders even more tightly. So as for the Chairman Kim, under the pandemic, he does not want to have lots of trade with China. They want to minimize the trade with China so that they can overcome these difficulties. Currently, the key area of the North Korea is to build the domestic market and to expand the domestic market because they know that the trade with China will not come back in the meantime. That is why they want to expand their domestic market. That is the policy number one. And the second policy is they want to make the economy self-resilient. They want to survive on their own. They want to overcome the economic difficulties with their own two hands. So, many scholars outside of North Korea are wondering whether they can overcome the economic difficulties, but the Korean scholars who are studying North Korea can estimate that they can somehow manage to survive these economic difficulties. The food, oil, fertilizers, officially and unofficially, China is currently providing those materials to North Korea. So North Korea want to be self-resilient on their own, and they are trying to build a more domestic market. And in addition to it, there is some support and the supply from North Korea about oil, food, and the fertilizer. And that is why we can estimate that North Korea somehow will manage it through.
Thank you very much, Professor Im. I think we are virtually out of time, but I'd like to do the unfair thing of asking Ken and Eun-jung to conclude with a forward-looking brief remarks. We have the final year and a half or so of the Moon Jae-in administration, as Eun-jung mentioned, and the first year of a Biden administration. What in COVID provides incentives for Kim Jong-un to either change his approach to the United States and South Korea or not to change his approach?
I would say that it really comes down to the U.S. The ball is in the U.S. court. If the U.S. wants to engage, they're going to, in an asymmetric relationship with North Korea, we being the stronger power, we're going to have to make the first concessions. North Korea is willing to sit there and go through self-sufficiency and juche as long as they have to. I think China is going to sit there. If push comes to shove and North Korea needs support, China will provide the support to keep the stability there. So if we're going to get any movement whatsoever, it really is going to come down to the Biden administration deciding that's something they want to do and look for a way to engage with North Korea. And we're going to have to take the first steps and make the first concessions.
Okay, again, thank you very much. I really learned a lot from this webinar. And Dr. Brown, I would love to discuss more about all this, relations between the politics and economics. I do appreciate your comments. Of course, I know all this economic situation is not that good. Of course, it's not good for the leadership. And then as the Dr. Park and then Dr. Cha already highlighted, because of all this lockdown situations, the poverty level will go down and further, which is of course not good. And which in the longer term, ultimately, which might undermine the legitimacy of the leadership. But what I was trying to say is in a shorter term, as of now, it's just for today, the leadership itself, it doesn't look unstable. That was what I was trying to say. And having said that, again, our leadership, again, the Moon Jae-in leadership, it does have only 1.5 years at max, right? And then Biden administration will have a really hectic year for 2021 because of all this domestic polarizations, all this hatred, mutual hatred between the two camps and so on. So we cannot be that optimistic for any, any more like a proactive measures from the Washington for the probably first half of the next year. That's my actually concern. And then China, as always, again, the backing up officially or unofficially. I understand that too. I don't want to just blame China all the time. That they do have their own reason to back up the North Korea's economy also. So that's having had all this, situations together. Again, I cannot be that optimistic about any, real actions to deal with all these nuclear issues. But still, I cannot but just go back to the nuclear. Of course, I'm a nuclear person, so that is why I always go back to the nuclear. But without probably having some solutions, some solutions about the issue, they cannot move on either. They cannot just have normal relations with the United States, for example, or Japan, or with anybody else. So it's definitely as is not a good news for their economy or for their people. So hopefully, I hope we can persuade Pyongyang and so can have a deeper dialogue and common goals with the Washington before too late again. So my concluding remark is really vague. I'm sorry about it, but but again, I really enjoyed the discussion and looking forward to the next time too. And thank all the people who asked the wonderful questions. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you very much, Eunjung and Ken. I think in some ways we have with Dr. Park's sort of grand reset strategy a possible option for Washington or the new Biden administration to pursue, and yet, as Eunjung just mentioned, very difficult domestic situation here in the United States. I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning, and thank you to all the panelists for your insights. We'll continue to watch this situation as it unfolds in this darkening winter. And I apologize to any of the questioners whose questions we did not get to this morning. But thank you all for an informative discussion, and please join us again for more GWIKS events and North Korea Economic Forum events. So thank you, and please join me in thanking the panelists.